Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I didn't get to come through last time. We had a really fast-paced race last time. Really, if you look at it, we were in a 68-day primary for the special election, and then we were basically in a 147-day general election. So think about it. I mean, it's essentially fast forward until next June, and like on June 14th, after this craziness of the special election, I was, in a position where like, okay, I'm in for November. As a presumptive nominee, we still had a primary, but we were very much focused on beating Barber. And in 147 days, in a race that nobody thought we had a chance, we weren't even on the radar. We were the lowest priority race in Arizona. We weren't even in the top 75 that the national pundits were tracking as competitive. We went to bed election night 1,300 votes ahead of Ron Barber. If you remember how this played out, over the next 11 days, they had more ballots to count. And I actually went to freshman orientation. I am in the photo of new members of Congress. And 11 days later, it flipped, and I ended up losing the race by 0.84%. So it was very, very tight and very unexpected. We overperformed what anybody thought we could do. I'll give you like 1 minute of my background if you don't know what that is. But I served 26 years in the military. Graduated from the Air Force Academy as a distinguished graduate, straight out of high school. I have 2 master's degrees, one from Harvard and one from the Air War College, where we send our senior military officers for training and a master's degree. I worked for Senator Kyle for a year as a legislative fellow when I was a major. Instead of going off to command and staff school, I got the chance to actually work on the Hill. And I'll tell you, I kind of blame him for me getting, the conviction to run for office, because I hope you guys all like Senator Kyle. I mean, here is a man of brilliance and conviction and character who really made a difference as a workhorse instead of a show horse. And I really got to see that as part of his inner sanctum in Washington, D.C. And among all the other different assignments I had in the military, I've got 325 combat hours in the A-10. The Warthog that we see, which is the home of the A-10, is Davis-Monthan. I had the privilege to be the first woman in U.S. history to fly a fighter in combat and also to command a squadron in combat. I had the privilege to command the one operational fighter squadron here at Davis-Monthan. There's one squadron that's worldwide deployable, and I commanded that squadron from 2004 to 2006. Took them over to Afghanistan, and very privileged that under my command, our team won the Air Force Association Schilling Award that year for the best contribution in the field of flight in the nation for the challenges and the success we had in our combat deployment there. So I had other assignments in the military at the operational and strategic level. My last one was quite interesting. I was the chief of current operations, standing up United States Africa Command. So I was responsible for a lot of our counterterrorism, counter-piracy. You guys seen the Captain Phillips movie? I got that phone call on Easter Sunday to come into the operations center and deal with that hijacking. And I can tell you some unclassified stories of some of the stuff that we dealt with. But the terrorist organizations in Africa that are impacting both in East Africa and North Africa, I can speak a little bit about that. Those who were responsible for the deaths of the ambassador and 3 others in Benghazi, I was very much dealing with, at least trying to deal with, at our level, those threats as they were emerging. So for 3 years I was responsible for making sure that our troops and our embassies and all that, as they were requesting help, I worked a lot with the State Department people, so I understand that process. Any sort of evacuations or humanitarian or medical situations or whatever it was, in our counterterrorism ops, that was all under my watch at Africa Command. I was a professor of national security studies at a place called the Marshall Center for a little while after I retired, so in that capacity I have a lot of national security expertise just from my background. So again, I'm happy to answer questions on Iran or Hezbollah or anything else you may have there. I mentioned kind of how we did in the race. I've lived in Tucson on and off since 1994. I was stationed here first in 1994 to fly the A-10. I was in the military, so when I wasn't living here, it's because I was ordered to go somewhere else, but I bought my home in 1994, and I was lucky that of my 22 years as an officer, I spent 9.5 of them here in Tucson. So I basically had back-to-back assignments, 94 to 99. Then I went to work for Kyle. Then I was shipped over to Saudi Arabia. You may have heard the story of my time in Saudi Arabia, where for 8 years was trying to get the Pentagon to change its policy that made our women wear Muslim garb when they were off base in Saudi Arabia. It came to a head when they, 6 years into it, ordered me over there. I did file litigation against the Pentagon, and I ended up getting legislation passed through the House and the Senate to overturn that policy once and for all. It was an 8-year battle. But by myself, with significant, I mean, I basically ended my career over it, quite frankly. I mean, I had opportunities after that, but whenever you put yourself on the line like that, it often impacts sort of the tribal, nature of you don't challenge the system, right? So, but my oath of office that I took is to the Constitution of the United States only. As an officer, how many served in the military here? So as an officer, your oath is only to the Constitution. As an enlisted member, it's to the Constitution, the President of the United States, and the orders of the officers over you. But as an officer, it's only to the Constitution. From the day I entered the Air Force Academy, I was taught that leadership means doing the right thing and standing up for that oath, even if it comes at a personal cost. And I never thought it would come to that, but in that case it did after 8 years of going up and down the chain of command. And I did what I needed to do, and we used all 3 branches of the government, God bless America, and got that thing overturned once and for all. So let me tell you a little bit about the race and kind of where we are right now. We are, because of what we did last year when nobody thought we had a chance, this is now CD2 in a rematch between me and Barber is a top 5 race in the country. And that's not just by the party. I'll kind of go through, who's analysis. But for the party, they, look and they're looking at which races are vulnerable, which members of Congress are more easy to flip. Obviously, they're looking at business decisions and where, all in that regard. And because of our situation and almost pulling it off last year, this is in the group of the top 7 that the party's trying to flip in the country. It's the highest priority in Arizona, the highest priority race to flip in Arizona. And of that top 7, it's really in the top half of that top 7. So it's definitely a high priority race. On the flip side of that, of course, that means the Democrats, it's in their top list of members to try and save their jobs, right? So there's going to be a bunch of money thrown in by the Democrats trying to save Ron Barber's job. That's just the nature of a competitive race like that, so we can expect that. If you look at like the Cook and the Rothenberg reports, that those guys are the ones that analyze independently which races are competitive for each election cycle. In the Rothenberg report, they have only 5 pure toss-ups, they call them, where they say, hey, this could go either way. They rate the races either like lean Dem, tilt Dem, toss-up, lean R, tilt R. And our race is one of only 5 pure toss-ups in the nation. In the Cook report, I think they have 8 or 9 pure toss-ups. So it's not just, the GOP that's saying, hey, let's win this seat finally. As you know, we had CD2, used to be CD8 for 22 years. And then, when Giffords won it, we just haven't been able to snatch it back. So we do have an opportunity to snatch this back this year. The conditions are much more favorable for us this year than last election. If you look at last election, we had no time, right? I only had 147 days. I was trying to, get out there as a candidate with very little name ID. At the same time, I'm being attacked, right? So when we're trying to define who I am, they're trying to define who I am with lies. And people are early voting, and so that's just a huge challenge. We just didn't have a lot of time. They played right out of their national playbook. Since I was a Republican, I was part of the war on women, I'm against the middle class, and I forgot what the other ones are. Oh, seniors, right? It's all we're against seniors, right? So, no kidding, they used that I'm part of the war on women. And, give me a break. It just was straight out of their playbook. I came back on that pretty hard. If any of you watched my debate with Barber, I came back in his face. You want to talk about a war on women, walk a mile in my shoes. And that little clip went viral, but it was the week before the election. And so we ended up on Greta Van Susteren and Fox and Friends that last week, and we raised $200,000 in 7 days because of that clip nationwide, but it was too late. We had already lost the early voting, even though we won the voting on election day, right? So we have more time is the bottom line, and they're using their same playbook attacks that we've seen them use throughout the year. Anybody who's a Republican is an extremist, right? That's the language you're seeing come out of them. Give me a break. I've been fighting extremists my whole life. I've been wearing the uniform in order to, defend Ron Barber and his family from extremists, quite frankly. So that language isn't going to stick, right? They may try to have, their little scare tactics, but that just doesn't stick, and it just doesn't define, who I am. The situation that has unfolded over the last month has been a wonderful gift to us with Obamacare. Barber is all over the map on this in his minefield, trying to be for it and against it at the same time, because he realizes CD2 is a center slightly right district. I mean, it leans just slightly right. The district voted for Bush, McCain, and Romney, believe it or not, and has a Democrat representing them, but just by a little bit. I mean, Romney won by 4,000 votes. So he realizes that, so he votes with the Republicans because he knows his job's in jeopardy, but what he's doing is torquing off his base. Of course, they won't primary him, but hopefully that'll translate into lack of enthusiasm for donations and get out to vote, right? But he's been for it, but now he's not for paying for it, and he wants to give everybody a break from it. And we're just going to have to nail him down on this, because that is he's literally, bailing water out of his sinking boat right now. And he's like, I didn't vote for it, but he supports everything that Gabby Giffords did. I mean, we're not going to let him get away with this, right? Depending on who he's talking to, he changes his tune on this, and it's all about him saving his job. So I think nationally, that's going to be a big deal for us in 2014 as this continues to play out and be the disaster that you all knew and we all predicted that it would be, but now people are actually, feeling it when they're getting their notices and they're getting their premiums raised and all that kind of stuff. So. In addition, some other, just sort of campaigny stuff that helps us for this election. We will be at the top of the ticket this time. Last time we had Obama above us. Again, Romney won by a little bit, but what actually hurt us more was Carmona. Flake race was above us, and Carmona's base was Tucson, and so he beat Flake by 22,000 votes. And that matters, as you guys know. When people are down ticket voting, you're asking them to cross back over. And 20,000 of them did, but we needed another 2,002 that didn't, right? So this time we're at the top of the ticket. The off-presidential year electorate is in our favor, right? Usually it leans, in our district, sorry to be kind of campaign wonkish here, but this matters if you're going to win, right? You need to have winning strategies. So the electorate leans like 1.5 to 2% to the right. And again, I only lost by 0.84%, and we were surging past him on election day. So we did a poll in June just to see where we were starting. Keep in mind, he's now a more entrenched member of Congress. He's on TV all the time. He's in the local paper all the time, and I'm off the net since last November. And in June, we started with him 46, me 45, which is, it's a great place to be. He just barely got 50% last November, and he's dropped down. When we asked the question, and this was before the last few months where people are sick of incumbents, but when we asked the question, does he deserve another term or is it time for a fresh face, it was almost a 10-point split, people in this district saying it's time for a fresh face. And we're sure that's gotten bigger in the last couple months, just because there's a overall frustration with incumbents and the dysfunction in Washington, D.C. So bottom line is, to use a flying analogy, we had a lot of headwind last time, and what I didn't mention was, he had just won the special election to replace Gabby Giffords. There was that connection to Gabby Giffords that was difficult to break in the community, and now he has to stand on his own 2 feet and his voting record, and that distance is going to be, much more significant. For some people, there'll still be that connection, but they were never going to vote for me anyway, right? So for the rest of the community in the district, this is about a choice between two clearly different people, a leader or a follower. I've got a record of lifelong leadership. He is a government bureaucrat. He has been a social worker in the government system and then a staffer. And hey, you need good staffers. When I get elected, I'm going to need good staffers, but that doesn't mean you need to be a member of Congress, right? Those are two very different sort of profiles. Since Barber's been in office, he has been a bystander at best. He votes based on what he thinks is going to save his job, but he certainly isn't leading on anything, and he certainly doesn't even know what questions to ask. I'll talk about one issue, which is the A-10 and Davis-Monthan, to make sure you guys all have the record straight of how this thing is unfolded. So, I flew the A-10, I commanded a squad of the A-10, I still have friends in the community and in the Pentagon, and I was getting some intel, you may have heard it, James T. Harris was talking about it, but I was getting some separate intel that in this budget drill going on with sequestration, the A-10 was potentially going to be cut completely out of the Air Force's budget next year. Okay? So there's two reasons why we need to care about that. You know, first, as Americans, you care about, and I know as Republicans, you care about a strong military, and you know, a military that has everything they need to get the job done when they're asked to do it. The A-10 is the world's best close air support aircraft. There is none other that has the capability that it has to support Americans on the ground under fire with their lives at stake. There's other airplanes that do, you know, type in the coordinates and drop weapons over here when maybe a firefight has stabilized, and they call that close air support as well. But I'll tell you, my toughest missions, myself and as a commander, were often when the guys, you're flying down low with them, the guys are on the run, they don't know what their coordinates are, they're literally giving you a mirror flash of the sun in your eyes so you can see where they are, and you have got to understand and figure out where's the good guys, where's the bad guys, you know, where's sometimes the civilians, and deliver firepower, often with a high risk of fratricide, right, and a high risk of civilian casualties. It can be very complex, and you can't do that with a B-52. You know, you just can't. So the A-10 is the best capability. If you talk to anyone who's served, who's had A-10s or other airplanes overhead, they want the A-10 overhead. And so this thing is the world's best, you know, capable aircraft. It eventually was supposed to be replaced by the Joint Strike Fighter, which is a separate issue. The Joint Strike Fighter is a wonderful airplane, but it cannot replace the A-10 in close air support. Okay, for the missions that it needs to do, to gain and maintain air superiority and get access in a high threat environment and all that, it's a great fifth-generation fighter, but it does not have the capability to do close air support and survive. It only has 180 bullets on board. The culture that they have will not be trained in close air support. So we thought that was going to be a discussion for like 2028 to 2030, but because of sequestration, all of a sudden the A-10 is on the chopping block, which is a huge deal for American military troops. Okay. The second issue is the impact to our community. $1.6 billion economic impact at Davis-Monthan. The whole reason Davis-Monthan exists is it's a national treasure for tactical air-to-ground aircraft, because they can use the Barry Goldwater ranges, the weather, and the airspace here to train and get the world's best training in that for a tactical air-to-ground aircraft. Okay, there's other airplanes here, but they could be sent somewhere else if we don't have an anchor of a tactical air-to-ground aircraft here that's using the national treasure. So just to give you that background, so we're getting intel that this is potentially going away. I got some confirmations that that intel was true. I wrote an op-ed in the Arizona Daily Star, I don't know if anybody saw it, on August 27th, addressing that, hey, we got to wake up, this is an issue, we could lose the A-10 and we could lose, therefore, Davis-Monthan. 5 days later, Tim Steller wrote a column in the Sunday paper, essentially calling me and those who were addressing this an alarmist, okay? That there was no risk to the A-10 in the short run, but this is the gift that we got. They quoted Ron Barber. So they interviewed Ron Barber, and on September 1st, go check it out, September 1st, Ron Barber is asked, is there any risk to the A-10 in the short term? And he says, flat out, no. There's no risk to it being cut. The Air Force has just put some money into it for, you know, upgrading its wings and its avionics, which again shows his ignorance, because the military often is putting money into programs they're canceling at the same time. It's not the best use of taxpayer money. But he doesn't understand, you know, where C-27s are coming off the assembly line and into the boneyard right now, right? So he's naive and doesn't even know what questions to ask, right? And just sort of parrots what he's heard. No, the A-10 could be a risk. 3 weeks later, 2.5 weeks later, the Secretary of the Air Force, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, all of them get up publicly at their annual conference and say, if sequestration goes through, we have to get rid of single mission aircraft, including the A-10. And they say it publicly. Okay, so now Ron Barber, you know, he's asleep at the switch, wakes up, uh-oh, you know, he's on the House Armed Services Committee. He represents the whole of the A-10. There's 3 A-10 squadrons here. It's the only base in America, in the world, that has 3 A-10 squadrons. And he doesn't even know that they're at risk of going away. So now he is scrambling, making floor speeches, writing letters. I mean, if you saw in the news the last few days, he's writing a letter. Oh, God bless you, writing a letter, Ron Barber. I mean, that is not leadership. He was clueless on the issue. The Senate version of this year's defense bill has a provision in there directing the Air Force and the Army to study whether there'll be a gap in close air support capability when the A-10 eventually goes away. That was intended to be a long-term question. The House version of that bill, with Barber sitting on the House Armed Services Committee, has no such language in there. So somebody in the Senate from a state other than Arizona, I know who it is, but I was told not to divulge it, cared enough about the A-10 to insert that language in the Senate version of the bill. The guy who's representing the home of the A-10 is asleep at the wheel and doesn't even fight for it himself. So he is scrambling now to basically cover his tracks and be like, I'm saving the A10. But it's too little too late, quite frankly. And I hope that all of you would help rewind the tapes and show that he was asleep at the switch, because the media is not doing it. And in an interview with him this week, I went through the whole timeline with them, and they're still not reporting on it. Instead, they just take his press releases. Oh, look, Brian Barber's trying to save the A10, and they put it into an evening news segment. So, we got to be able to fight against that, again, by having a good winning campaign that we can actually, we don't have to buy our own media if the local media is not going to, not going to put us on earned media. We'll just turn it into a TV commercial, right? So, we got to do what we can in order to take him out. So, the bottom line is this is a very competitive race. It's totally winnable in a rematch of me versus Barber. We had the momentum last time. We're continuing on the momentum. We got a year to do it. He's incredibly vulnerable. I'm inside his head, which is a wonderful thing. It's part of psychological operations we do in the military. He knows his job's in jeopardy, and we just got to crank it out and fight it out over the next year to get us to victory. So I'd be grateful for all your help, and I'll stop and ask any questions. Yep.
Can I just ask two things? Can you tell us how you think you can secure the border, and also how you bring business back to Arizona?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, securing the border is still a problem, even though it's not talked about often in the national media. By the way, we've got, not that we had leadership at Homeland Security before, but right now there's like nobody in charge, right? Most of their high-level positions, they're all vacant right now. So we had poor leadership to start with, and now it's, really, nobody's there. So look, I've spent a lot of time with the ranchers down on the border who are living with this as a threat to their family, and a national security threat potentially, right? With the cartels coming through, and anybody else can come through. It's only a matter of time. So we got to look at it like it's a national security threat, and we got to use the things we know on how to do intelligence-driven operations. Instead of having guys at checkpoints 50 miles away that you have to drive through like you live in the Gaza Strip every day, they should be at the border. And we should be using our intelligence-driven operations to, it's not that difficult to figure out where the corridors currently are that they're coming up. And then you use a combination of the intelligence and the sensors, the ground sensors, the air sensors, in order to be able to detect the movement, and then you monitor it, and then you intercept it. But you do it at the border. It's like, if you're at a football game, you don't defend in the end zone, you defend at the line of scrimmage. So get at the line of scrimmage, and by the way, this is also, the ranchers are sick of Border Patrol roaming around on their property. Get at the line of scrimmage and address the problem where it is. Right now, you got the cartels with spotters on hilltops saying shift change happening, they're gone, and then they go ahead and they go under, over, and catapult and everything around there. So we got to use the throwing more money or manpower at the problem is not the way to do it. We probably do need some more resources, but it needs to be a better strategy first. You don't just throw money and manpower. And we also need to make sure that we've got commerce flowing, though. I mean, we've got to be smart about how we're balancing that, because I mean, Arizona, Mexico is our biggest trading partner, and so we've got to make sure we've got a way to securely move commerce so that it can benefit our economy as well. So we can't just be sealing it off. We got to make sure we've got all the tools and the systems and the manpower to be able to inspect the trucks that are coming through and make sure that this is the direction they want to come. Because we have potential to be a logistical hub here, and right now Texas and California are beating us out on that.
I was just going to say,
and so it kind of gets into your next question. So there's a lot of things dysfunctionally locally, more than I could list in this meeting, that are impacting the unbusiness-friendly environment here, and certainly the city council elections were depressing in that regard, right? Because it seems like there's little change. So, we've got city and county issues that are dysfunctional, but at the federal level, I think we need to be focusing on where we have some unique capabilities in southern Arizona. The first is that our strategic location. I mean, we are strategically located as a potential corridor for logistics, for economic development coming up from Mexico and from Central America, right? So we got to take advantage of that and invest in that so that we can attract businesses to come and set up all the different parts of the logistical infrastructure, because those would be good jobs, right, that we could bring here.
The irony is it works for the cartels very well.
Yeah, exactly.
The legitimate business has all kinds of roadblocks.
Exactly.
The black market works very well using our state.
And do you have any specific ideas how you would bring business here?
Sure. That's one element. The second element, let me talk about the kind of businesses. is, I mean, we've got to further capitalize on the U of A that's here. I mean, we do have research capabilities going on, especially in the tech industries. Tech Launch Arizona is a great start. I mean, if there's some entrepreneurs and investors that I've even talked to that said, hey, if we could capitalize more on the tech transfer, some of the research that's being done, and turn it into entrepreneurial ideas and businesses that then want to start here, again, especially in the biotech and other industries, that's a potential to attract and bring those businesses here. The defense aerospace industry is another one that we have a natural location here with Davis Monthan and Raytheon and others, that we should be trying to bring in other elements of even the supply chain into the region. So how do we do that? Well, some of that is state and local stuff, right? We've got to become more business friendly. We got to deal with not having too many roadblocks of regulation and tax wise. So some of that stuff I can help lead by setting a right climate, but you got to get the state legislature, the county, and the city to actually become more business friendly. But I can certainly do my part to make sure, as an example, hey, we're going to at least compete with California and Texas for the manpower that we have at our Mariposa border, so that we can at least make sure we're not a bottleneck and that we have the ability to become that logistical infrastructure. Again, with the right, judicious spending of taxpayers' money in the right places. If it's being spent, why not spend it in Arizona instead of Texas and California in order to do that stuff?
Okay. Another question, sort of get back maybe to your strength.
Yeah.
I'm a former naval officer in naval aviation, the best Air Force. I'm just kidding. But I saw something in the Drudge Report that concerned me, and I'm sure it concerns you, that Air Force pilots are leaving. And
yes.
One of the things I'm seeing right now, I think it's not just only pilots, but all middle grade officers are leaving, and that's cutting our future. Comment on it.
Big time. If you didn't see that report, the Air Force has a shortage of fighter pilots right now, and they've put together a 9-year bonus for like $225,000 for pilots to stay, and like next to none of them are taking it. One of the reasons they're not taking it is because of the budget cuts and sequestration. Squadrons are being grounded. I mean, they're not flying, and so you're like, if you're going to get stuck for 9 years to be a fighter pilot, you want to actually fly, right? So the squadron I commanded here came back from Afghanistan in the spring, and because of the budget cuts, they were grounded. This is a big deal. This is 25% of our fighter force was literally grounded. Like, come to work every day, not one airplane is getting airborne. The entire squadron went into zero readiness. They started doing a little flying about 4 months later, but you can't just turn a squadron like that overnight. And the implications in the pipeline for the long term, now you have captains that are missing 6 months of experience when they're becoming majors and squadron commanders. It's a ripple effect. It's not just in the Air Force. I mean, I know a lot of pilots out here that are like, I'm not staying if this is the Air Force I'm going to be in. I went to our Association of the United States Army dinner the other night, and there was a briefing given that was quoting the Chief of Staff of the Army, who was testifying before Congress in the last week or two, and he said 85% of his brigades are not ready to deploy. 85%. He said that, I want to say, 1/3 of the captains in the Army are going to be basically kicked out in the next few years. These are captains that have multiple combat deployments and experience under their belt, that are doing great, that have wonderful records, and we're basically going to say, beat it, and send them to the curb. We're going to have a hollow force if something doesn't change. This is the worst I've seen it in my lifetime. Yes, sir.
You said you lost the early vote, and
yes.
One of the reasons that I saw was that Ron Barber had a bunch of very effective commercials. Because he had been the chief of staff at the Tucson office, he is very good at helping local people.
Right.
And he plastered the airways with all types
of his staffer stuff, right? I helped somebody save her house. Well,
yes,
we have 900 foreclosures in Pima
but
County.
the point is, whether the guy is good or bad is not the point. That is a very effective tool.
Yeah.
Have you got, I don't want to ask you to give away a secret of winning the election, but have you got something that can counter that? Because that is a damn effective tool.
It is. I mean, we definitely need to have, personal stories for sure. So, I mean, we haven't come up with our whole strategy and our messaging, and a lot of that kind of rolls as you're doing it as well. So you give me the signal. Do we need to get going soon? Okay, we're going to drive to Phoenix here shortly. So, you're right. I mean, he did constituent services, and for a lot of people, how they touch their congressman is constituent services, which is basically the staff, right? I mean, the staff is just doing stuff to help you. The good news is that it appears his staff is jumping off the ship as well. The Sierra Vista person who worked for Colby and Gabby and him, and she is the anchor in Sierra Vista for helping with constituent services and all the veterans issues and everything. She is like loved down there. If we had a debate or a discussion down there, literally a question from the audience was always, are you going to keep her on your staff because they won't love her so much? She just left that office. His chief of staff has left his office, who is also his campaign manager. So, our hope would be that some of this would be, sort of a little bit of a shake-up that you would see impacting both his campaign and his constituent services. But yeah, I don't have our TV commercials mapped out, but we want to make sure that last time we were introducing me to the community, and it was a lot on my bio. This time we have to also make sure that people don't think, and I say this, this is my team saying this to me, it's not me saying it, but people don't think I'm like an action figure, but I'm actually somebody who's fighting and connected, with you and can understand and are helping people and is stepping up to serve and be a servant leader to help people. And so I don't have an office like he has and can benefit from that, but the personal testimonies, I think are very powerful. People relate to those personal testimonies. So in our social messaging and other messaging, we're going to bring them in more this time. If you got any ideas, I'd love to have them. So. Yes, ma'am.
Martha, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, where would you say you stand on the Second Amendment?
Well, I was endorsed by the NRA. I would call myself a 10. I always tell people my favorite gun is the 30 millimeter, which is on the A10. It's bigger than a Volkswagen, right? So it's probably bigger than any gun you have at home.
No, not necessarily.
But yeah, no, I'm a strong Second Amendment supporter. Again, I had the NRA's full support last time. They chose not to strongly, actively play in the district because of the sensitivities of the circumstances, if that makes sense. But they were totally behind me. So, I consider myself 10. Yes, sir. Oh, yeah, you're sorry.
No, I just wanted to thank you about the A-10s. When I served in Vietnam, the gun mount next to mine, the gun crew next to mine, was hit by a U.S. Navy Phantom jet missile because they were shooting in the general direction of the enemy, and we were close. A-10, I would love to have had that there instead of Phantom, we would have, some of our men died. That's what we need in Congress, is someone that can think now instead of general strategy, we're going to shoot down the line. And I appreciate that about you in combat, and I want that in Washington, because things aren't always going down the road like you planned, and things change.
Right, you got to be agile.
And you've got to be able to think on your feet, and I think you can do that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks. Those are skills.
I'm curious what you think about the letting go of top U.S. military officers by the Obama administration right now. It seems a little spooky to me. And then the important question is, how many G's do you actually pull in that?
Okay, so we had to do the centrifuge up to 9 G's actually with the tilt, which is what the F-16 is. We had to do 7.5. We had to be tested to 7.5 G's in the centrifuge and stay conscious. The reality is, on a day-to-day basis, the A-10 doesn't have a lot of power in its engines, and so we can do some strong instantaneous G's, but then it bleeds off. Or we have to keep going downhill to hold the turn. So on average, we could pull up to 7 G's in the airplane. The structural limits are like 7.33, but really it would be probably more like 5-ish sustained would be more typical. So that basically means that my arm weighs 20 pounds, and I'm going to hit a switch or whatever. It's as if I have an 80-pound weight in my hand. It's as if my arm weighs 100 pounds. So I got to be able to function under that while all your blood's going to your feet. So it's good stuff. I used to love bringing in my gear to talk to kids and show them all the stuff, because it's a science lesson too about, hey, you got to keep your blood pumping from your heart to your head, and why you go unconscious and that kind of stuff. So I've lost a few friends in a G loss of consciousness accidents actually in the F-16. Often in the A-10, most of our mishaps happen because we fly so close to the ground. It's often flying into the terrain as opposed to a G lock. So good stuff. Okay, well, you had another question. I forgot what it was. So we're talking about the A-10.
Top brass.
Oh, top brass. Yeah, that's the top brass has always been slightly political, but it seems for sure in this administration that he's definitely lining them up and making sure that they are lined up into his mindset, or else they'll see the door. So I think it definitely seems to be it's typically political, but it seems to be much more so in this administration.
For your information, I was in the correct Air Force also.
Awesome.
The best one.
Yeah. Let's make it a Bella pitch before we're done, by the way. Trying to get him adopted.
Yeah.
Save that story in a second.
Anyway, what I wanted to ask is, you bring up all these issues with military spending.
Right.
Clearly, the situation has changed. We spent a lot of money in Afghanistan and Iraq. A tremendous amount of money, not a lot of return for it in my mind, but there's a lot of material, a lot of stuff that's going to stay over there. It's never going to come back.
Exactly.
Right, and we are spending money, like you said, to build brand new planes and ship them straight to the boneyard. We're sinking all this money into the F-35 and the F-22, which are just boondoggles, and they're not ready anyway. Like, what can we do to redirect, if the reality is sequestration, the reality is less money, a smaller force, fewer deployments to faraway places, like what can we do to make the money that gets spent effective and useful?
That's my biggest, frustration with sequestration. It's just a failure of leadership and putting into autopilot and letting it drive off the cliff, right? And then nobody's responsible for it. There's ways to gain efficiencies and savings in the DoD budget. I live through it. Every end of the fiscal year we go on a spending spree in every squadron, buying all sorts of stuff that you don't need and is going to end up in warehouses. There's way too much travel and conference. There's all sorts of ways to gain efficiency and overhead and all that. So the way to do it is like actually a thoughtful strategic cut as opposed to a salami slice that's hurting across the board. And so I think if they, we look at, okay, we know we need to cut the budget, we do have a spending problem, but let's do it through like thoughtful choices that are strategically thought out, and there's definitely savings that we can, we need to be a lighter, more agile force for sure. I do support the F-22 and the F-35. I do believe that we have to remember that we've got to have the ability to gain and maintain air superiority in some potential future situation. We can't afford to have any sort of enemy aircraft from who knows where, bombing our troops or our soil. We just can't. So we got to make sure we have that capability. But we got to balance that with all the other challenges we have: a good nuclear deterrent, a cyber force to protect our cyber infrastructure, special operations, intelligence. We need to have a budget-based or a strategy-based budget, not a budget-based strategy. And there's definitely ways to save money.